civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership, coalitionradio.us, where just all sorts of wonderful stuff can be found, including a video from our current, soon-to-be introduced guest's last appearance just way back in 2017. It's been way too long. A quick thank you again to Allison Chapman from Health Choice for Action for her conversation, her erudite, articulate, on-the-point, fact-based analysis of a legion of healthcare laws that are staggering their way into the Golden Dome there, if you will, on Beacon Hill in Massachusetts. Look to Facebook.com/Coalition Radio for additional coverage of that. Well, it has been way too long. And he's gonna. I don't know what he's gonna say when he hears this, but truly one of my heroes in economics is joining us again for the first time in a couple of years. And let me explain the context. We were just talking, had a guest on who has made some courageous choices in terms of challenging the status quo in healthcare, and faces. It's a pretty tall audience, pretty tall challenge to go against the status quo. Hate those words this year, but the status quo. Professor Victor Matheson has taken on, I think, one of the great challenges in economics and in society today. Now, and when I say that, what I mean is economics is as much an analysis of human behavior as it is numbers. In fact, see if I get this right, but it's really the impact of behavior on numbers that is the focal point of really what I'll call practical economics, how they impact people in their day-to-day lives. Doesn't take the old rocket scientist to go out and figure that as a society, we spend an enormous amount of money subsidizing, catering to, spending personal disposable income on sports. It's an obsession of our society, go back virtually every civilization. I don't expect that to change anytime soon. But in a time when state and federal governments across the planet, if you will, are facing near insurmountable challenges and having to rethink the very way they do business. And it is a multi-trillion-dollar business, as we all know now, how they educate children, how they pay for health care, whether or not employee benefits are going to be a lifelong benefit of having been employed by government. All of those are coming into focus, I believe, in no way seen in modern American history and even across the planet, whether it be the chaos that occurred in Greece just a few years ago. We seem to have forgotten that. Whether it be France, whether it be developing nations in sub-Sahara, or whether it be here in cities across the United States, mill towns, the Rust Belt, major, metropolitan cities like Los Angeles and New York are facing huge challenges in how to run government. So while we simultaneously give homage to all things that are sports, it has got to be an incredible professional challenge to take on the sports industry and, let's just say, point out some of what I'll call the big lies. So congratulations for your ongoing efforts, whether it be decisions to hold the Olympics, and I think in part because of your work and some other people's work, that the Olympics are no longer the international go-to they were, and whether it be in Boston with the No Olympics or across the planet. I think there are cities now that are starting to see the impact of these decisions first and foremost because of your analysis and your profession, and in a way that I don't think happened 20 or 30 years ago. So congratulations for the body of work that you've accumulated. And yet here we are again. And I'll just say this, it probably can't be that far from your desk at the College of the Holy Cross to where I think one of the great boondoggles in New England is taking place, which is the construction of Polar Park. How did we end up, because of your efforts, in part, getting rid of that for only to have you end up with it? How did that happen, Professor?
Yeah, it certainly is ironic that I've spent 20 years talking about stadium subsidies and what a bad deal they are for local cities, and only to end up with a $75 million subsidy for a minor league ballpark right here in Worcester. And what's crazy about that is is New England actually had been pretty good about being able to turn away these requests for huge amounts of money. We have an almost entirely privately financed Gillette Stadium. Fenway's private. TD Bank North Garden's private. As a matter of fact, more public money is being put into the minor league ballpark in Worcester than the stadiums for the Celtics, Bruins, Revs, Patriots, and Red Sox combined. And again, I can basically see the stadium from my office, and so we've been successful sometimes beating back these huge subsidies, but I wasn't able to complete the same thing just right in my own hometown.
Well, and how, I guess part of that would be and I'm not trying to castigate people in city government. I'm not trying to do that, but it was almost a stealth operation when it came to the WooSox, wasn't it? I mean, you had years of protracted hearings here in Providence and Pawtucket, Rhode Island, that folks like myself, went to religiously, did whatever we could to raise hell, and to say no. Ultimately, the first time we won. The second time we sort of won by default because I'm convinced it was public pressure that forced the speaker to put together such terrible terms that the now WooSox could only just turn them down. I mean, they were virtually unworkable. The presentation he was ultimately was passed here in the State House. So then all of a sudden, it strikes me that Worcester is that rebound boyfriend or girlfriend who just wakes up the next morning and side by each with a baseball stadium. Has there been any sort of public outcry from your perspective about this cost, or are people just all in? They're just excited.
I think it's more that people are all in, and you're right. I don't agree with the decision that the local city government made, but in terms of playing this game well, I think Mayor Ed Augustus did a fantastic job. Kind of taking the temperature of the city, figuring out how he could get this done in a way that Boston. He looked at Boston and the Olympics and said, if you start a grassroots effort against this, it's not going to work. He saw what happened in both Providence and Pawtucket and said, all right, the only way this is gonna happen is if basically we make this a done deal and kind of ram it through without a whole lot of public input. I thought he did, again, from a political science standpoint, I think he did a great job. From an economic standpoint, not so much. But what was really successful here for the now WooSox is they really, really played on the psychology of Worcester. Worcester is, in terms of population, it's the second largest city in all of New England, bigger than Providence, bigger than New Haven, bigger than Hartford. Yet, we've always had this huge inferiority complex, and I think they very successfully played upon that and said, hey, if you want to become a big league city, the way you do that is by getting a minor league baseball team. But that's basically what they did, and I think they did it very successfully.
Right, and for purposes of tonight's conversation, we're going to step past morality because, as you know, I'm a libertarian and a very active libertarian. And from a moral perspective, using the force of government to engage in the coercion nature of taxation to take money from one group of people and put it into a private investment where you can't even begin to rationalize the whole flawed for the greater good argument, to me is frankly immoral. From an economic perspective, and we've had people in from the Worcester Business Journal, and they're nice people, giving us a lot of background. It strikes me that it's turning out to be the same old story. You've got groundbreaking for the stadium. The stadium is moving along. From your perspective, have you seen any of the much valued ancillary investment popping up in Worcester? Is there been any move at all to monetize that area so that they can actually, you ready for this, make debt service? Call me crazy.
So I'm actually very bullish on Worcester, and I think they won't have problems making debt service on here, but that actually brings up one of the big economic fallacies going on here. Mm-hmm. Is that stadium's going into an area of Worcester that for the last 10 years has been kind of the hottest new area. It's where all the new restaurants are going in. It's super up and coming. It's been gentrifying like crazy. We also know that Worcester was going to put in, someone was going to put in a large hotel in Worcester sometime in the next couple of years because Worcester is under-hoteled. And so we knew all of this economic activity was going to happen, and we knew a lot of that was going to happen either in the downtown area of Worcester or in the area where the ballpark is going in, about a mile south of downtown. So, yeah, there's a ton of new and exciting things going in around the ballpark. But before the ballpark was even announced, there was a ton of new and exciting things going in around where the ballpark is. And so if we're spending $75 million to get economic development that would have happened anyway, that's not a very good spending of public money. And if we are taking an entire new hotel that's going to be going in there and directing all of those hotel revenues towards building the stadium, rather than taking those hotel revenues from a hotel that would have been built in short order anyway and directing it to anything else in Worcester, then again, maybe not a great use of public funds. So I'm not concerned particularly about whether Worcester is going to be able to pay the bills. I think what an economist would be concerned about is we've taken an up-and-coming neighborhood and decided that we're going to take all of the economic benefits from that neighborhood and we're going to direct them into a stadium and direct all of that money towards, a billionaire ownership group. And that is going to be basically we're privatizing public benefits and putting them into private pockets.
Right. So I often use the example, and we use this a lot during the run-up to the attempt at the Paw Sox Stadium. Wright Patterson Air Force Base is the number one, my understanding, Air Force research facility on the planet. And it is in the greater Dayton, Ohio area. So the baseball powers that be talk about the gentrification, if you will, or the boom that's occurring, or the resurgence in Dayton, Ohio. And fascinatingly enough, the good burgers of Dayton, Ohio actually do a yearly economic analysis, and it's quite well done. It's meant to be towards the taxpayer per se, but they talk about growth, they talk about tax collections, they talk about unemployment, employment, what the bright spots of the economy are. And clearly, when you've got this massive research facility in your town, you're going to attract all sorts of higher income professions, which are going to drive income. They're going to step up the heat in the economy and bring all sorts of wealth into the local economy. Interestingly, missing from that entire document was any reference whatsoever to the minor league baseball team. It simply wasn't even qualifying as an afterthought. So, we talk about a couple of economic concepts here, and just kind of do a quick, we'll do it right about now, if whoever your companion at the College of the Holy Cross who's teaching freshman economics is probably right about now covering, I guess, the multiplier effect, opportunity cost, and the substitution effect. And it strikes me that the first and most important concept here is the substitution effect. And if you could explain that to folks, because that ties exactly into what you just said.
Right. So the substitution effect is when money that was going to be spent one place in the economy gets spent elsewhere. So the most obvious example in Worcester would be, so now we've got this new up-and-coming, entertainment and dining and bars area near the ballpark. Now, if those are new people coming to town from outside of the region and spending money there, then that's truly economic benefit. But if this is just people who normally were going to bars and restaurants on Shrewsbury Street, another kind of big restaurant district in Worcester, if people were going to be going to bars and restaurants in Shrewsbury Street and instead are going to now bars and restaurants in the Cal District where the stadium is, well, then you've spent $75 million not generating new economic activity, but just relocating where the economic activity in the city of Worcester is taking place. Basically, you spent $75 million to move economic activity about 2 miles down the road.
Right.
So that's the substitution effect.
Right.
And that shouldn't be counted as an economic benefit. That's just, again, shifting around where money is spent in the economy.
Right. And from a moral perspective, one of the most successful arguments we made was we pointed out to a variety of stakeholders, restaurateurs, entertainment facilities, that effectively your tax dollar, the tax dollar spent by Sal's Pizza, is in one sense, it's indirect, but in a very real sense, is being used to subsidize the presence of economic competition for the same entertainment dollar that you're competing for. You're subsidizing your competition, aren't you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Again, there's only a limited amount of entertainment dollars people have to spend. That's that disposable income that goes to these things. So, the question is, where are we going to spend that money? And every dollar that goes into the ballpark is maybe another dollar that's not available for the movie theaters, for Hanover Theater, for other restaurants in the area.
So then we'll go to in our continuing course of Economics 101 here, there's the multiplier effect. Educate me, Professor. My understanding, and tell me, please be brutally blunt if I'm wrong here. My understanding, of course, is that if money is spent at a local, hyper-local restaurant or a locally owned department store or a hardware store, then that money is more likely to be spent and kept in the local economy and thus have a higher multiplier effect than, say, money that is spent on debt service to a organization that represents to some degree capital flight because of the nature of its employees, the nature of who's financing the building, and the nature of the now dissipation of local tax dollars that are going essentially back towards Boston. Is that a fair argument?
Right. So again, multiplier effect is when money that's spent in the local economy gets respent and respent. Again, perfect example that you brought up. You go out to a restaurant, you pay your bills. Some of your money goes into the server. You leave a nice tip for your server. Then that server spends that money the next day going out and getting a haircut. That barber then spends that money at local grocers, and again, that money gets multiplied through the economy. This is a real effect. And it means any dollar that's injected into the economy can actually result in many times a multiple, if you will, in total economic impact. So the question is, how much does a dollar spent get multiplied? And that's where we come up with this term of what's known as a leakage. Money that leaks out of the economy doesn't stick around to get multiplied. And what we know about sports in general is sports has a very high leakage rate compared to lots of industries. So again, anything that's hyper-local, again, a local restaurant, not a chain, a restaurant owned by local individuals, those are things that, a local theater troupe, that sort of thing, is going to have a very high multiplier because that money is going to stick in the local economy. Professional sports are actually really pretty terrible. We don't have great numbers on minor league baseball, but we do know for major league sports, roughly half of the money that's spent goes into the players' pockets,
right?
And only about 15% of all players live year-round in the cities in which they play. So that's a huge amount of money going into players' pockets, but not staying local because those players actually don't live local.
Now, from your perspective, and you truly have a global look on this issue, it struck me that just as recently as a year or two ago, that the trend had started to accelerate away from public financing. As you mentioned locally, you've got a significant private financing presence in big-time sports here in New England, possibly one of the best examples in the country. And interestingly enough, all of these organizations appear to be thriving financially. I mean, I work in Foxborough, Massachusetts. I see the growth and what they've been able to do with that facility. God bless him. He put up the risk capital. His businesses put up the risk capital. They did the sweat equity. They did it the right way, if you will, for the most part. All of the other sports organizations in this area seem to be thriving, which is in contrast to the rhetoric, which usually says that we cannot succeed in the absence of public financing. What is the trend nationally and internationally? Are we seeing? Is this just a blip that happens to be local, or are we seeing retrenching, if you will?
Yeah, so we actually have good data on this. The stadium boom in the United States began in the early 1990s. If you want to pinpoint it at one time, it's the opening of Camden Yards in Baltimore, which had a couple big effects. Number one, it's just a great baseball stadium that everyone likes. Second of all, it very specifically was done with the intent to try to revitalize that kind of a downtrodden area near downtown Baltimore. And it was done with a huge amount of public funding, not in terms of total dollars, but at least in percent of the total project. So Once everyone sees this great new ballpark in Baltimore, everyone gets a case of stadium envy, and now everyone wants one.
Right.
And we have a huge stadium boom where almost every major league sport in all the big sports got new stadiums over the next about 20 years. But then we had the Great Recession hit in 2008, and we had a major economic downturn. And what people saw was it became very distasteful to be pouring hundreds of millions of dollars to build new stadiums for billionaire owners and millionaire players when local city governments and local state governments are laying off teachers and firefighters and police officers. And so we had a huge change in the thinking about public funding of stadiums. Prior to the Great Recession, so post Camden Yards, but prior Great Recession, we had about 2/3 of every dollar spent on new stadiums in the United States was paid for by the taxpayer, with the owners of the teams only covering about 1/3. From 2008 on, those numbers had switched, so that about 2/3 of all money was now being paid for by private investors, with taxpayers only counting about 1/3. If we look across minor league baseball, at least that period from 1990 to 2008 is similar with Major League Baseball. Again, huge number of new stadiums being built, most of the money coming from, again, taxpayer money. Post 2008, we did not see quite the same thing happen in minor league baseball as we saw in the major leagues, in that we still saw quite a bit of taxpayer financing coming through. And we see this, for example, in Hartford, just up the way. We see this in Worcester, and we see this in a variety of other ballparks around the country. So in most places, yeah, there kind of a corner had been turned, people wising up saying, maybe this isn't where we should be spending taxpayer money. Again, I wouldn't say we won, we won the war. Again, we're still spent billions of dollars of taxpayer money, but at least those numbers had gone towards the idea that maybe private baseball teams and private football teams should be buying their own stadium rather than expecting the taxpayer to bail them out.
So here we are, it's 2019. Again, just when we thought it was safe to go into the water. And we've got a couple of things happening here. Now, you may not have seen this yet, but on Monday morning, the good citizenry of Rhode Island is going to be treated to yet another opportunity for, apparently, there's a complete lockdown, if you will. I've tried and failed to get their information early so that I could just publish it ahead of it, just to ruin their morning. But it appears that potentially on the horizon, in a city like Pawtucket, now they're talking about, and this is the new term of the new millennium, a mixed-use development. Love that. Mixed use being typically high-income housing, luxury-style housing, a soccer stadium, potentially a brand-new soccer stadium, and again, the attendant retail that's going to save the world, even though there are malls hosting similar stores that are starting to go out of business because of just the gradual evolution to a cyber-based economy. So here we go again, potentially. And again, in one way, it's almost unfair. It's too early to tell. There's also, we'll talk about it in a minute, about the federal subsidy, the federal tax component of it. But soccer stadiums, is this the new aquariums of the new millennium? I mean, we went through that whole aquarium phase where cities like Trenton or Camden, were building aquariums because that was gonna save them. Is there any real difference? And I guess my other question as an economist, we've got here in New England, because of the gentrification, and Worcester's feeling it, Providence is even feeling it. Cities like Providence and Worcester, I always say, are the last to lead and the first to bleed. So God forbid there's a turnaround, we'll be the first ones to hemorrhage some of these. But you see this constant growth of housing stock geared towards luxury housing. They're using tax stabilization agreements, outright grants. At what point in time are we artificially altering the market to make it more attractive for developers to build luxury housing as part of these developments? And are we giving, in a sense, twisting the market up so that a free market can't function and build housing that's geared towards the part of the economy that's screaming for it? I mean, what do we do in these situations?
So that's obviously a huge, difficult issue, and it's not clear to me that at least in Providence and Worcester we have the same issue that, of course, is going on in New York and Boston and London, for example, where we're building huge amounts of luxury housing stock, mainly as a way to launder money for international criminals, right? So we know that a massive amount, and I mean real criminals, not just I mean the real. Right. The real oligarchs, the drug lords, these sort of things. We know that there's a huge amount of high-end housing that is not being lived in, and is specifically done to be allowed to bring in huge amounts of cash without the same sort of money laundering controls that we get over other things. So that's obviously an issue. I don't think that's probably the issue in Worcester and Providence. I don't think there's a massive amount of drug money being laundered there, but certainly that's a possibility. I think what the real issue is that I think developers think they'll have a whole lot easier time selling $1 million condo than selling $100,000 condos. And of course, the local city governments love that $1 million condo rather than the $100,000 condos, because they know that the amount of money that they're going to be on the hook for education and public services is going to be a tenth as much if you only have one family as opposed to 10. And so, everyone is fighting for this pool of high income people because, again, big revenue stream and a whole lot less work for local government services. Unfortunately, there's a fairly limited pool of multimillionaire folks who want to live, who are able to afford those sort of housing. And you can pretty quickly get priced out. And so, it's again one of these ironies that we have huge amounts of new luxury housing coming in, while actually the overall U.S. housing stock is not keeping up with population growth. Right.
So, on a moral level, the question to me is, who is development supposed to benefit? The people who are there, and Worcester and Providence have distinct physical similarities, if you will, in terms of population, the makeup of the population, the economics. You've got a significant part of the population that's underperforming economically for any one of a number of reasons. So these are the people who, in the gentrification that ultimately will take place at some level in cities like this, as it's fueled by this type of superficial investment, that tends to drive out the very people that we're purporting to support, whether it be Pawtucket or Worcester. I'm just wondering, we see that as a local trend. Is this same type of behavior happening across, and how much of that is based on sports stadium development, if you will, as part of this mixed use category?
So here's the problem with gentrification. Gentrification's just a much more tricky problem when it comes to economics, because I can make a pretty straightforward argument saying, look, for soccer stadiums, for baseball stadiums, for hockey arenas, any of these things, if someone wants to build it and use their own money to do that, I'm not anti-stadium. I'm just anti-public funding of stadiums, because we don't have good evidence that public funding for stadiums is a very good investment for local economies. Mm-hmm. It's a much harder issue with gentrification, because most gentrification isn't being driven by some sort of taxpayer handout. It's mainly being driven by people with money who want housing that's close to local amenities and close to downtown urban cores. And yeah, it definitely drives out the people who are already living there. But that's a harder question. Should I allow a rich person to buy out a poor person in a fair transaction, and leaving that poor person without their home that they've been in? That's a much harder question than, should I hand out $75 million to a billionaire ownership group to build a baseball stadium that they're going to collect all the profit from? I think the morals and the ethics are pretty clear on the baseball stadium. It's a much harder question of what do you do when general real estate trends price people out of the place where they've lived forever, especially when it's not, some sort of public money or public taxpayer money or some sort of economic inefficiency that's driving these people out of their long-time homes.
Yeah,
And I don't have a good answer.
no, and the issue here is that despite the fact that Providence is largely, I mean, I call it a zombie city, not philosophically, not in terms of the populace, but financially it's a zombie city. By all intents, it should be bankrupt. We're still writing tax stabilization agreements and getting, in the case of one building that it looks like will be built now, $25 million grant, if you will, to stimulate the development of a 60 or 70 story luxury housing tower in a city like Providence, which is desperate. So my clearly, if someone in a consensual business relationship decides to sell their property at extreme profit to someone who will functionally change the neighborhood, hey, God bless them for being in the right place in the right time. It's this continuing insistence that government has to somehow subsidize activity that a bunch of us are on the warpath about, because whether it's a stadium or a luxury tower, a lot of the same stuff's going on, and it's just frustrating as hell. What's your take? Have you guys done much research now that seemingly that soccer is now the new wave of baseball?
Yeah, so if we look at the data, the big wave of new stadiums over the last 10 years has all been for Major League Soccer. Obviously, there's been some of this at the minor league level as well. Just for full disclosure, I was a referee for Major League Soccer for a bunch of years, and I did referee in the league, USL, which is the United Soccer Leagues, which is the league that is talking about moving into Rhode Island.
Right.
They've had a presence here for many years at a lower level. To be fair, I'm a gigantic soccer fan. That being said, just because I'm a gigantic soccer fan doesn't mean everyone in Providence should subsidize my stadium and my facility. We are seeing a lot of stadiums in Major League Soccer. Typically, those stadiums have been have had a smaller amount of subsidy than we've seen, at least historically, in baseball and football. They don't have quite that same sort of hold over the local populace that like a Boston Red Sox has. So they can't, when they go hat in hand, they get down a little quicker than other folks. So we've seen a bunch of completely privately financed stadiums, for example, in LA, in Minneapolis. We've also seen some stadiums again, like Worcester and like Providence, kind of second-tier cities, those cities that kind of have to buy their way in. Major League Soccer wants to be in big metropolitan areas like Minneapolis. They don't necessarily want to be in second-tier cities like Cincinnati, and therefore Cincinnati has to offer more money to be part of that game. Columbus has to offer more money to be part of the game in a way that, again, New York City, that stadium there in New Jersey, almost entirely privately financed because, again, Major League Soccer needs New York more than New York needs Major League Soccer, and therefore the subsidies don't flow.
Right.
We have seen some of these in minor league baseball or minor league soccer as well. And again, minor league soccer, just like minor league baseball, is all over the place. So in the USL Championship League, which is a two-division league of about 16 teams per league, 18 teams per league, we have some teams that are routinely attracting 10,000 fans a night and selling out exactly the sort of stadium being proposed potentially for Pawtucket. On the other hand, in that exact same league, we have teams that are drawing on average about 400 people a night, which is roughly what Providence College draws for its soccer games at its really, really nice new stadium that they built in the last few years over at DC. So again, these are things that potentially could go really, really well and be this great amenity and this really fun thing for the state and for the local community. On the other hand, again, they have not been shown to routinely be great drivers of attendance. And again, Rhode Island has had a team in this league at various levels for about 10 years. And, they never caught lightning in a bottle with that.
Right. And on top of that, as you mentioned, I mean, Providence College is as far as American universities, has a top-tier soccer program. If you look, and you've got the Revolution, which, by the way, are approximately 12 miles up the road. So you've got Major League Soccer there. I happen to work in Foxborough. The crowds are not, they're good. They're not overwhelming. Where I work, we provide parking for the stadium during major stadium events for charity. We always joke, if you're going to get ripped off for parking at Gillette, you might as well come to us, because we give every penny to our local children's charity. That being said, we don't close and provide parking for soccer, and it's, so to me, those type of highly localized litmus tests, which I think speak profoundly to the viability of it. And then again, and we had to make this distinction in the fight against the public subsidies of the Paw Sox. There's two arguments to be made here. There's, number one, the viability of the actual investment, and then there's the morality, again, of taking public funds and dedicating themselves, because ultimately you talk about opportunity costs. And given the fact that we don't have limitless, seemingly we don't anyway, or supposedly we don't have limitless ability to bond, if we're taking money and investing public funds into this, isn't there an opportunity cost to what else we could be doing with that in terms of whether it be infrastructure development or, let's get crazy here, lower taxes for everybody so that everybody can open up a business in Worcester? Is that a fair assessment of what opportunity cost stands for?
That's a perfect assessment, and I think it's a nice assessment from, again, both sides of the political spectrum. Every dollar you spend on professional sports is a dollar that either you can't spend on other social programs, on education, on other, arts, on parks, on things like that. Obviously that's the liberal side of the coin, or it's money not available to reduce taxes elsewhere in the economy. That's the conservative side of the coin. So this really is, this idea of opportunity cost. This isn't a red-blue thing. This is a reality for anyone, no matter where you lie in the political spectrum.
So do you, from your perspective, have you seen any cities that have said, okay, first of all, not only are we not going to use public money for a stadium, but because the question that always comes to someone like myself, because we're portrayed as naysayers, and what was it, the one time I was called the nattering nabob of negativity. I'll take that to my grave. That and Saving the Rhode Island Taxpayers, our group, amongst a bunch of really active good government groups. There was a coalition that saved the state of Rhode Island $80 million. And, it starts to add up. After a while, we're talking real money. I don't regret it for a minute being involved with all these great people. But ultimately, is there anybody out there in state government or city government doing the right thing and just following that path of fiscal responsibility? Let's try to find ways to lower the cost of doing business so everyone can flourish. Is that happening, or is that just a pipe dream?
Well, so certainly with sports, typically New England has been a real leader in that, being able to say no to sports teams and say, look, this is what we will provide to you as a sports team. We will provide to you a rabid fan base. We'll provide to you a fan base that is very high income. We'll provide to you a setting in which that your business can thrive. And lo and behold, it turns out that people like the Red Sox and people like the Patriots and people like the Celtics can thrive just fine in New England without massive public subsidy to build their factory for them. Actually, the same thing is happening in California. Again, the Golden State Warriors, obviously the defending champs here in the NBA, or at least for the last several years, kind of the leading team. They're building a brand new arena, all on their own dime in San Francisco. Mind you, there's some stuff happening. The people are helping and pulling some strings here or there, but again, it's not the hundreds and hundreds of millions of just handout of money that we have seen in the past. LA, we have a brand new stadium that the Chargers and the Rams are going to move into here in the next year or so. That's a multi-billion-dollar stadium. Again, all privately financed. And the reason the Chargers are playing in LA and rather than San Diego is because the San Diego taxpayers said, no, thank you. We're San Diego. We will be just fine without the Chargers. We're like the greatest city in the United States. We have sun 320 days a year. We're not going to be too concerned about losing a football team that we can always watch on TV instead if we want. So, we have seen a bunch of cities push against this. We have seen that's been successful in California, in Seattle. We've seen this in New England. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it all over the country, and we still see cases even in otherwise wise New England, handing out, again, 75% of the construction cost of that stadium, $75 million, is being handed out to a minor league baseball team. And again, this is an investment that would make no sense for them to take on their own. A minor league baseball team don't generate much revenue. They certainly don't generate the amount of revenue needed to build a $100 million stadium, which is, of course, why folks like Larry Lucchino go and with hat in hand asking other people to pay for their stadium.
And of course, Professor Victor Matheson of the College of the Holy Cross, as always, I'm so grateful you take time on your Friday night to join us. The last trend that I want to talk to you about, because we've just got a couple minutes left, you now see what's becoming apparent across major league sports, which is either the acquisition of or the development alongside of and then ultimately replacing of minor league sports by the global league itself. Now, the NFL has got a development league over in Europe, and just a couple of short weeks ago, to much shock, the Major League Baseball is clearly making its first moves towards its Dream League, which is their own development league, as opposed to the minor league baseball, when somehow they managed to rescind 50-plus minor league baseball affiliations. They didn't shut down the teams because they don't own the teams, but they just said, okay, listen, fellas, it's been great. You're on your own. Shockingly to many, the Lowell Spinners, which has been considered by many a well-run, almost a visionary franchise, particularly for a short-season single-A team, they were amongst that. Do you see, from your perspective, or am I just trying to connect my own dots here, is Major League Sports, NFL, NHL, NBA, MLB, have they decided, we're going to monetize our own development leagues? We're no longer going to just allow this income stream to be sucked up by this messy group of individual businesses? What's your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts on that is more that there is not necessarily that much money in minor league baseball. So even though minor league baseball does draw millions and millions of fans, it's not drawing millions of fans willing to pay $60, $70, $100 a ticket like you might go pay at Fenway. These are tickets and athletes that are, these are $5 tickets, these are $8 tickets, these are $11 tickets, and so these revenue streams are not huge. And the question is, for Major League Baseball, who is going to do their player training for them? The NFL has been pretty lucky so far in that they've had this entire pool of unpaid college athletes and these colleges doing the training for them. So these athletes are pretty good by the time they get to the NFL. Major League Baseball has done much more of that training on their own. And of course, they actually pay the salaries of those players. So, again, the great irony, right? The Blue Sox, the Paw Sox, these are owners who don't pay for their stadium and don't pay for their players, and just collect all the revenue. That's a pretty good business to be in if you can be in it. And now maybe Major League Baseball says, we don't want to pay all of those amounts. I don't know if that's a good move for Major League Baseball or not, because how do you develop that next generation of fans unless kids are going to those games as a young kid, watching those games at a place like Pawtucket, at a place like Worcester, at a place like Lowell. You can't go to many games when it's $70 a pop to go there with your mom and dad to the real thing at Fenway. So I don't know whether this is one of these things that's penny wise, pound foolish, but we'll see how that all comes out here.
Have they announced ticket prices for the Blue Sox yet? Has that been publicly put out there to the good residents of Worcester?
It has not been. My guess is they will have tickets starting certainly in the $8 to $10 range, and obviously one of the things that sports teams are really good at is trying to be able to sell to a huge range of folks. They do a little better than the movie theater that has just matinee and evening, and just a couple different ticket prices. Obviously, sports teams do a great job what's called price discrimination and trying to sell all the way from the $4, $5 ticket all the way up to the $50 ticket, and they will try to do anything they can to separate the dollars from their fans' wallet.
There you go. That's the one thing that's consistent across. It's entertainment. We may call it sports. We may say we're number one, but ultimately, it's entertainment. On that note, again, thank you so much for joining us. You lend our show a sense of well-informed gravitas that we would not have without your participation. I guess we'll just revisit this in a few months if you don't mind, and let's.
It'll be. It'll be my pleasure. So I always like talking baseball. It'll be interesting to see how how this comes out. I expect that Worcester will have a fantastic first few seasons.
Right.
Of course, we paid a lot of money for those first few seasons. What will be really interesting is 10 years down the line whether they're still selling that stadium out and whether it has long run legs. The data suggests that that's a hard thing to keep going after that honeymoon effect is over.
Absolutely, and that's when it comes to the debt servicing, when it comes to its impact on the community, when it comes to all of these these troublesome loose ends that you and I have talked about tonight. Well, that's when the proof is in the proverbial pudding. So, listen, have a wonderful holiday weekend. Best to you and your family. And again, thank you so much for setting such a high bar. Taking economic analysis and bringing it to a point where it impacts people's lives out of the range of the esoteric. That's powerful stuff, so congratulations.
Well, again, thanks for having me.
All right, we'll talk soon. Wow. What do you think of that? Let's weigh in on Facebook, on Twitter. Let's look towards Monday morning's announcement to see exactly who's going to pay for this $400 million behemoth. My projection, I think it's going to come out of the Commerce Corp. I think it's the state. I think it's going to come a little bit from Pawtucket. I think it's going to come a lot from federal tax breaks that are supposed to go for a low to medium income housing. We shall see. Professor Victor Matheson, College of the Holy Cross, editor of the Journal of Sports Economics. Thank you. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Stay tuned. Lynn Ulbricht, mother, activist, freedom fighter, the controversial yet story that's based in basic human rights, the imprisonment of Ross Ulbricht. We're going to talk about that tonight. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.